to transition over now to another great friend. I mean, this is so cool that we're all able to meet here, from our different parts. It's it's unusual in this field to have so many wonderful mentors, and I count both Ricardo and Jeanette as my mentors. And another up-and-coming mentor for me is Dr. Michelle Owens. Can we bring Michelle up? Hi, Michelle. It's great to see you.
It's great to be here.
So I just have a little intro for you, Michelle, and then I'll let you take it away. Okay, so I just want to introduce everybody to Michelle. Dr. Michelle Owens is a professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. She completed her residency training at Johns Hopkins Hospital and her fellowship in Maternal Fetal Medicine at UMMC. And she is the program director of the Fetal Medicine Fellowship and the Maternal Fetal Medicine Division Chief. She served as a member of the executive board of the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists. You'll note I'm spelling everything out here because we have so many people from around the world. They don't all know what ACOG stands for. And the Mississippi chapter of the March of Dimes, as a current board member of the Mississippi Women's Foundation. Now, I knew a lot of this about Michelle, but I didn't know until I read her profile on this wonderful site here that she also hosts Mississippi Public Broadcasting's weekly talk show, Southern Remedy for Women, which focuses on women's health issues in the South. And of course, I also know her as a talented actress because she appeared in our interprofessional education module. So Michelle has it all, really. So I'm going to welcome her and let Michelle take it away. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Anne. It is really a pleasure and an honor to be here. This has been a long time in the making, and I'm so glad that even a pandemic could not delay us this year, and that I have the opportunity to address the group. This is probably going to be a little bit more of a different presentation than you may be accustomed to, because this is really kind of a story that I think demonstrates some intersectionality with the information that we know about breastfeeding, but it really is also a different one for me because this is my journey. And as a physician and a women's health advocate, I take care of high-risk pregnancies, and moms and babies are really something that I'm very passionate about. By working in the Deep South, I also have kind of learned to use my voice to work and represent the underserved populations. And so this is kind of my journey to breastfeeding, though, because that was not something that was necessarily innate to me or something that I had a lot of experience with. And interestingly enough, even though I completed medical school and residency in obstetrics and gynecology, did not have a lot of education or knowledge about breastfeeding. And so this is kind of like a process that I wanted to share with the group just to kind of demonstrate, number one, that we don't all come here with this information, but two, how through being open and through learning, we can become what you'll hear me say over and over again, everyday advocates, and how one person can still very much be a catalyst for change. So with that said, I have no financial disclosures. Any of you who have heard me speak in the past know that I'm kind of easy to predict. My first slides in most presentations start off with slides of my family. And that is because they are really my why. And so as we go through the course of this talk, this is, again, somewhat personal, but I believe that everybody needs a why. And if you think about it, each of you probably all have a why, a reason that gets you up in the morning. When you have a really bad day, the thing that allows you to go to bed looking forward to the next day, something that really keeps you going. And I think with all of the distractions in life, sometimes we can be a little drawn away from that. And so I've always found this to be something that's very centering. And the other part is that I feel like anytime that I give a lecture, I am sharing a part of myself with my audience. And so I wanted you to understand that these three little people, who are not as innocent as they look on this slide, are really the part of, they are my why, and they are very important. And my kiddos have been a never-ending source of comedic relief for my life, and also some constant challenges. But they have given me the opportunity to participate in the most fulfilling job that I've ever had, and that is of motherhood. And all of these are just kind of, I think, strands or fibers that all come together that I hope you'll understand are such an important part of my walk. So our objectives are going to be really simple today. This is kind of going to be preaching to the choir because the majority of you are already very much engaged in and enthusiastic about this work. So I figured I'd make this part simple so you wouldn't have to worry about checking off the boxes and being able to answer test questions at the end, but you could really focus on the process and also being able to think about your own specific walks. So first, to discuss the benefits of breastfeeding for the mother-infant dyad. And I did that so that we could talk about the benefits for both the mom and baby, to identify 2 benefits of breastfeeding in general, and then to discuss 3 ways to support maternal breastfeeding. That's where the rubber meets the road, right? So as you know, this was the title of my talk or presentation was Becoming. So I have to give my apologies first because when Michelle Obama wrote her book, Becoming, that's kind of where this idea came. I like the concept of not what you are, but what we become. So I have to offer my apologies to her. She is, you know, of course, a style icon, a former first lady, a best-selling author and speaker. I am not those things. She is, however, married to a political figure. She is also very passionate about motherhood and has been a very strong advocate for child health. And so, you know, again, it's not about who we are all the time, but who we become. And as we go through our journey, our walk in life, it's really all about, you know, what we are becoming. We will be talking about becoming many things. And again, my walk of becoming an everyday advocate on behalf of women and children. But I want you to think about what have you added to your list when you started your journey, and what are you still continuing to become? So this is kind of like becoming 2.0. I am, however, married to a political figure. I am very much passionate about motherhood, as I've kind of alluded to already, and an advocate for maternal child health. So we're not exactly the same, but maybe a little similar. And we happen to have the same initials, by the way. Just throw that out there. So we'll start off with just advocacy and what is advocacy. I thought I'd give a definition here because I have kind of coined this term of everyday advocacy. And I feel like that's one of the joys that I experience in my own work, is being able to be an advocate for women and children and overall health on a daily basis. And so I think it really exemplifies what it is that I'm trying to do, not only in my work, but also in my personal life as well, whether it's advocating on behalf of my children at their school or whatever it may be. But advocacy is any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends or pleads on behalf of others. And so that's when I talk about everyday advocacy, that I thought was a really good summation of what I mean and what I'm trying to convey when I use that terminology. So again, starting with the why. I like to tell as you know, I teach residents. And so as I'm teaching trainees, I always like to tell them why it's important. And in hopes that perhaps maybe if they recognize why it's important, if it's something that resonates with them, then it will stick a little bit more than just being arbitrary information. So the CDC, of course, identified breastfeeding as a key strategy to improve public health. And we know that breastfeeding matters, of course, because there are clear maternal benefits. And for those who are paying attention, you'll know that this portion of the lecture addresses the learning objectives already. So with respect to maternal benefits, we know that there's improved bonding. There's also improved return to pre-pregnancy weight. And I'm just going to tell you about that pre-pregnancy weight thing. So you might get back to that number. You know, on Instagram, they call it the snapback. You might get to that number, but at least for me, I just found that the kids don't leave you like they found you. So you might go back to the same number. You're living at the same address, but your whole house has been redecorated. At least that was my experience. So while that is also really important as you think about long-term health and trying not to accumulate other risk factors for adverse health outcomes later in life, whether it's fighting against obesity and those kinds of things, it does have a benefit in that regard. That was something actually that I experienced as a breastfeeding mom. And also, it helps with birth spacing. And when you think about the things that it actually decreases, it decreases risks for chronic illnesses like hypertension, hyperlipidemia, type 2 diabetes, and also cardiovascular disease. And also is linked to decrease in cancer risks for moms. And so as we talk about the benefits for the infant, well, of course, there's increased bonding. That's kind of a twofer, right? It benefits mom and baby. Also decreased risk in common childhood infections, decreased risk of childhood obesity, decrease in necrotizing enterocolitis, and also in SIDS. So now I'll kind of get into the meat of the talk, kind of talking about what has really influenced me, where I started. And this is a vulnerable moment for me. I think a lot of times we tend to make assumptions about people when they are in certain positions or when they do certain work, and you assume that who they are is who they've always been. And one of the things that I've always said is who I am is not who I ultimately am going to be, or all I'll ever be. But especially as it pertains to this issue of breastfeeding and understanding and awareness, I will admit that my exposure was very limited as I was growing up and even through my training. And so I really consider myself a person who would really be, I guess, termed the unlikely advocate. So when I think of, prior to my medical school experience, I really had not had a lot of exposure at all to breastfeeding, didn't think really much about it, was probably far more influenced by general societal ideas about the utility of the female breast, et cetera. And so then at the end of my medical school training, I was invited to go on a medical mission trip to Ghana, Africa. And that was for me a really transformative experience. It changed the way that I looked at a lot of things. And one of the really neat things about it was how drastically it transformed my view and opinion of breastfeeding. And the other part is, I think I didn't know anything about the continent except for what I had read in books. And being there, I was really surprised to find this open, inviting culture that was brimming with hope, really warm people filled with a lot of gratitude and a lot of love. And so this just shows you where Ghana is located in Africa. There are a lot of countries in Africa, so I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware. And I wanted to show you also, so this is an actual honed-in map of Ghana itself. I was also very much impacted by the resourcefulness of the Ghanaian people. And so in our medical mission, we went throughout the country, down to Cape Coast, through Accra, the capital city, up to Kumasi, to Tamale, and even off in the Voltic region. And I love this picture. This is why you've seen it twice in the past 4 slides. It was just amazing to me how resourceful these women were. And we provided medical care across the country for adults and children. And many of them would walk miles in order to be able to receive care in our mission clinics. And so they would wait sometimes for hours in order to be seen, hoping that we would be able to cure their ailments or to be able to offer medications or treatments for their loved ones. And so one of the things that I thought was really amazing was that these women would bring their children. And it was amazing how they had them wrapped in order to carry them. But even more than that, how openly they breastfed and how acceptable it was. Nobody paid any attention. It wasn't something that was a cause of concern or alarm. And it impressed upon me. I just saw how natural and beautiful this was. And I watched it actually in wonder as a person who is finishing medical school. Culturally, it wasn't awkward. It was just matter of fact. And it was such a beautiful, wonderful thing to behold. And I included this this quote by Mao Zedong, which is "Women hold up half the sky." And some of you may have read Half the Sky by Nicholas Kristof, an amazing book. I didn't get anything for saying that. Just one that I read and enjoyed that speaks about the way that women are treated around the world. Very eye-opening. If you haven't read it, I would recommend it. But I felt like these women, who were not women of great means, were really holding up half the sky. They were the hope of their families. They were making these treks and journeys in order to try to secure medications for their family members and to make sure that their babies were well. But the other thing was they were the sole source of nourishment for their children as they grew. And so that really allowed me to see this process with very different eyes. And I think as I became aware of that, I gained an understanding, and that made me less afraid or worried, less judgmental, and opened the door for me to become more supportive. And it was funny, I talked about this with the people who I traveled with, and I said, now I just as soon, feel comfortable if I ever have children to breastfeed wherever I wanted to. And before I thought, oh, that's something so private, it needs to be done in secret away from everyone's watchful eye. And after watching this happen, I was like, oh my gosh, this is something that everybody should be able to do. So now we'll fast forward to this past year. 2020, of course, has been a year of gains and losses. When we think about the pandemic and some of the things that have happened for us as a country, for us as a world, there have definitely been a lot of gains and insights, but we've also had tremendous loss when you think of the death toll from the virus and other things. And it also, I think, kind of expands to other issues as it pertains to policy and focus and all of those things. And I think in the timing of a pandemic, that makes sense. But we also, I think, need to be mindful and aware so that we can remain intentional about those things that also continue to matter. So when I think about the Healthy People initiatives, for prime example, if you look at what things looked like in 2020, it was, we were concerned about or focused on disparities. And so we had one breastfeeding objective and 4 sub-objectives in the nutrition section. Then fast forward to Healthy People 2010. And in 2010, it was more about ever breastfeeding, duration, and exclusivity. So there were 5 objectives, and they were included in the maternal, infant, and child health section. Then we go to 2020, and it was more of a condensed version of 2010. They added metrics on employer support, formula supplementation within the first 2 days of life, directing births to those facilities that were recommended care, that had recommended care for helping moms or assistance for mom who were lactating and for their babies. And so it was really, I think, probably the broadest that we'd seen. Even though there were only 4 objectives at that time, they condensed them and also started to move a little bit more into providing additional support, focusing on the communities and not just making this something that is limited to hospitals, but also talking about, well, how are we going to help support women as they transition from the hospital after they have babies? And in 2030, so Healthy People 2030, which just recently came out, was definitely more streamlined. Now, I will say, interest of full disclosure, the goal was to streamline the Healthy People recommendations. So 2030 recommendations, if you've noticed, are much more thin compared to years prior. And I think the thought was that it was starting to get a little too cumbersome. And so we were going to really kind of make it lean and focus on those things that were most important. And so what we saw here was that these are more streamlined, but it's focused on the increase in proportion of infants who are really exclusively breastfed through 6 months, and also to increase the proportion of infants who are breastfed at 1 year. Now, the thing that I want to say, we talk about everyday advocacy and the power of one and the powers of collective. It's really important to recognize that initially in the Healthy People 2030 recommendations, when they were placed up for public comment, there was only one recommendation. So we had gone from, essentially 5 or 4 plus with these sub-objectives to one recommendation. And fortunately, there was a strong enough dissenting voice about the limitations that provided that they changed it. So after the public comment, and you should pat yourself on the back if you were a part of that, the advocates, the moms, physicians, the whole group of the breastfeeding community really got behind this and wanted to create more attention in this space. And so I'm saying that, we understand you're streamlining, but one's not adequate. And so because of that, we have 2, which is actually 100% increase. We should be very proud. And it's 2, it's not 5, it's not subs and all this. But what they did say was that they were going to continue to report on those metrics from 2020. So we will still continue to gain this information as we go forward. And I think that's very important. But again, raising the idea of the significance and the importance of advocacy and the importance of the collective and how we can still make sure that we are continuing to raise awareness, even when we need to streamline, even when things are really important in other areas. This still needs to remain top of mind. And I think that is just yet another, I don't think we celebrate the wins enough. And so that was a huge win. And that came from the general populace. So just wanted to share that. And so now we'll talk about, where we really are now. With respect to the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations, of course, it should be that they recommend exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months and continued breastfeeding while you're introducing complementary foods for at least the first year. And when we look at how we're doing, and the latest data that I have is really related to 2017. So 84.1% of infants in 2017 started breastfeeding, so that's great. Roughly 58% were breastfeeding at 6 months. So a precipitous decrease within the first 6 months. And we'll talk a little bit more about what it is that happens that contributes to some of those declines. And here's an interesting thing. We talked about these other metrics and supplementation, the influence of supplementation. 19% were supplemented with infant formula before 2 days of age. So within the first 48 hours or so of life, almost 1 in 5 were supplemented with infant formula. And that was increased from the prior year when the number was about 16%. And so supplementing is not a horrible thing. And there are definitely times when that is reasonable and when it's necessary. However, I think if we flip the way that we're thinking and focus more on a can-do attitude, then the answer is not to just be too quick to supplement, but to see if there is more support that we can provide for moms who are trying to breastfeed or exclusively breastfeed, and to help them know that they can do it, and that they don't necessarily have to, in case of emergency, break glass. Well, you don't have to break the glass so quickly, and for them to also have the emotional support to know that things are okay, even if it's difficult, even if it's a little bit of a struggle in the beginning. You are learning, your baby's learning. They don't come with an instruction manual. Or if any of you guys happen to have one, please send it my direction, because I've been struggling with just trial and error. But they don't come with an instruction book. And so we need to be patient. And part of the patience allows for additional bonding. And I think that helps to create, it sets the stage for the development of this maternal infant dyad. It's trial and error, and we got to find the thing that's going to work best together, as opposed to thinking, oh, this is not working, let's just give up. So I'm off the soapbox on that. We'll move on. So when we talk about the health disparities that exist, and this is something that is also really important to me, and I spend quite a bit of time working on this in my official capacity. We know that health disparities exist. Health disparities exist in a variety of spaces within healthcare, and breastfeeding is definitely no exception. When you look at the non-Hispanic Black infants, fewer of them are ever breastfed when you compare them to Asian counterparts, the their non-Hispanic white counterparts, and even those Hispanic infants. So the non-Hispanic Blacks have the lowest rates across the board. But that it's not just a racial or ethnicity disparity. We see that disparity carried out in age. So our adolescents tend to have the lowest rates of breastfeeding compared with those who are in the 20 to 29 age group. And the highest rates tend to be in those of women over 30. And then when you look at socioeconomic status, we also see changes and disparities that exist there, with those people who are eligible for and receive WIC having lower breastfeeding rates than those who may be eligible and don't, or who are ineligible. So a little bit of work to be done there. Lots of different reasons why that is. But at least it's still important that we are aware of them so that we can look at those people who are at highest risk and really focus on providing the support that they need to kind of cheer them on, no pun intended, actually kind of a little, but to cheer them on so that they can feel supported. And just because you're in a high-risk group doesn't mean you have to be a statistic. And that's one of the things that I say to my patients often, and I believe that that's something that our moms need to hear. We need to give them a more can-do attitude. So what about Mississippi? This is an opportunity for me to throw in the shameless plug for my great state. Mississippi, when you look at our numbers, I just wanted everybody to kind of know transparency here about what we're doing. 70% in the ever breastfed group, 38.6% breastfed at 6 months. Again, we're losing about half. And then 20% breastfed at 12 months. And when you look at the exclusive breastfeeding rates, those rates are also, they don't start off at 50%, but from the place where they start, they drop off at a roughly 50% rate going from the 3 months to the 6 months. And then when we look at those infants who, and this is the thing, the infants who have received formula before the first 2 days of life, our numbers are a little less than the national average at this point, 17.5%. That being said, we have, I think, at last count, 21 baby-friendly hospitals. And this is a big deal because I remember when the first hospital was declared. And it's been in my lifetime. It's been like in a shorter period of time. And I was really proud to be on the first team to help my own facility receive that designation. And 19 of those are CHAMPS breastfeeding hospitals. So now I want to talk a little bit about why mothers stop breastfeeding. I've given you the data. You've seen kind of how the numbers fall off. And so there are lots of different reasons why that happens. And so I always ask the question, where do women breastfeed? And the answer should be everywhere. So if we are going to increase breastfeeding rates, if we're going to support mothers as they are breastfeeding, then we need to do that everywhere. It's not just a hospital thing. It's not just in the clinic. This is a part of life. It is a part of life. And so, of course, one of the reasons why women will stop is issues of latching and lactation. And that is just usually when we plug in the gaps by helping with lactation consultants and providing support. Concerns about their baby's nutrition and their weight. People feel like, well, the baby doesn't weigh enough, or my baby might have been small. And so because my baby is small, how do I know that my baby will have all the nutrients? And I always tell them, so this is a natural process. Our bodies don't know that we aren't living in caves. And so our bodies are designed to create what is necessary to provide for our children nutrition. Now, there may be issues where we, for whatever reason, cannot have that occur, but in the usual state, this is a natural process and everything that you have is within you. Isn't that a powerful message for women to hear? Everything that you need is within you to be able to do this. And I think that so often we hear about all the ways in which we are inadequate, and we bring that with us into our experience. And so being able to let women know that you can do this, not because of something, you don't have to go work out to do it. You don't have to do 10 jumping jacks and 50 push-ups. Like this is a part of how you were created. It is a natural process, and everything that you have is within you. And I think that message can be really transformational for women. Very empowering. Of course, there's some societal issues. I have specific slides for that because that is kind of one of my biggest pet peeves. So we will talk about that. Medications and breastfeeding. And again, I think we really should deal with this from a can-do standpoint. Safety first, but trying to find ways to allow women to continue to produce milk and generate milk and to breastfeed if at all possible, if there's not a true contraindication that exists. Unsupportive work processes. So that's another issue. And this is kind of in the societal issue. So work policies, lack of parental leave and accommodations. When I was breastfeeding my children at work, I actually had an assistant who would carve out 15 minutes at certain points of the day in between my meetings so that I could breastfeed. Everybody does not have that luxury. And I am so grateful that she had the sense to do that, because I didn't factor it in. But it made such a big difference for me. And to think that there are some women who can't even take the time to breastfeed at their jobs or have the ability to do so at work is just unconscionable to me. Cultural norms and family support, and I'll speak to that in just a little bit. And then also unsupportive hospital policies and practices. So again, we should create an environment that really uplifts women and encourages them in doing and carrying this out. Additionally, some barriers for those women who have substance use disorder. There's a lot of guilt associated with these patients. I see quite a few of them in my practice. And one of the things that I try to do is encourage them, if they are not actively using, to let them know that they are still very much candidates for breastfeeding. And a lot of times it gives them an opportunity to forgive themselves and to be able to move forward in a very positive way by continuing this relationship that they've created with their babies. It's a fresh start in a lot of ways. There are also some challenges for moms who are incarcerated. We've done a lot on advocacy for making sure that women are not laboring while they are in shackles, but there's not a lot of support for those women who have children and who want to continue to provide nutrition for their children if they end up incarcerated. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. And again, offering unique support for our adolescent parents to help them. I mean, their rates are the lowest, and there's a huge opportunity there for support for those women. So when we talk about societal barriers, I listed these because this was in a article online that I was reading about why women should not breastfeed in public. And these were actual terms from said article: that it was indecent, that it could be dangerous, that it created awkward social interactions. And I thought, with whom? Because it's surely not with the mom and the baby. It's an intimate act that has no place in public, and that it could even be illegal. Now, we know that that's not true, but I thought it was interesting because this was a recent article that was published on a blog online and had been hyperlinked by several other articles as justification. So you have to be very careful about what you read on the internet, for sure. So going back to this everyday advocacy, I want to say I can't express to you how important it is to know that this begins with you. It is so important to share your story. And I've told you about my experience in Africa. It has gone a little bit further. When I moved to Mississippi, I went to visit a church. And as I was visiting that church, the minister of the church stood up in the pulpit and said, "Hey, I want to just make a comment." And he basically said that there was a room that they had set aside or designated for those people who had small children. And they were calling it the nurturing room. And they wanted people to know that if you were a woman who's breastfeeding your baby, because they wanted it to be an open space for both moms and fathers to be able to be there with their children if they needed to, that if you're a woman who is breastfeeding, that rather than breastfeeding in the nurturing room, that you should probably take your baby to the bathroom in order to breastfeed, because they did not want the men who were there to be uncomfortable or be distracted. This was in a church and it really happened. So again, person who had not had a lot of experience with breastfeeding before, but had totally changed my tune after my trip to Africa, where I saw it normalized. So I wrote a letter to this very popular minister. It was a whole 4 pages explaining to him why human beings should not be relegated to eating their meals in bathrooms, and talking about the hygienic issues with that, and how if we were in a church situation, we talk about natural and how things are divinely designed, and just kind of really said, as the person who's the leader of this flock, please don't tell your breastfeeding moms to go to the bathroom and feed their babies. You would not go to eat your dinner in the restroom. Don't send them. And he actually responded to me in a very pleasant way. And I wrote the letter nicely. It was nice and informative. And he walked it back and apologized and changed it. And so I was very pleased for that. So one person can make a difference, but you got to be armed with education and be kind. As my grandmother says, honey attracts more flies than vinegar. And I also have this picture here, which is a picture of the breastfeeding room at the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology. So that's the certifying group. And when I'm a board examiner there. And during my time as a board examiner, I came and did the boards 3 months after giving birth to my twins. And when I gave birth to my twins, I was breastfeeding them both exclusively. But I did go to give the boards. It was the first time I had traveled. I was pumping and saving my milk. I had a refrigerator in the room. And when I went to go give the boards, I had to displace one of the executives at the board office out of his office so that I could pump, because there was no place for me to pump. And this is for our certifying body. So every day I would knock multiple times a day. He would leave his office and allow me to pump in his office. And so afterwards, he sent me a message and said, thank you so much for that. Sometimes you got to make people uncomfortable. He said, thank you so much for that. And he's like, I don't know how we designed this whole building, and we are OBGYNs, and we did not think to include spaces for women who are lactating. So now this is one picture. There are, I think, 4 of them in the building, and they are the nicest, plushest little spaces that both examinees, that their staff, anybody who comes in that building now has a place where they can do that. So again, that whole power of one concept. And sometimes you have to make people a little uncomfortable. It was real for him. He saw what I was doing, and he also was inconvenienced by it because he had to leave his office in order for me to have that space. But I just think that those are, again, celebrating the little wins, ways that people can still make a huge impact. It wasn't my goal to get them to create spaces. I wasn't saying, hey, you guys need to have a place for this. I was saying, I'm just a lady who needs to pump. We got to figure this out. And then it went to that next level. So I just want to say that everyday advocacy is really important. This is a picture of my mom. And I'm throwing her in there because my mom told me, in watching me breastfeed my kids, that it actually created an opportunity. Like she said, I wish that I had done that, because I asked her, I said, was I breastfed? Nobody asked that question, I don't think. I asked her. She said, no. She said that wasn't something that I knew anything about at the time. I didn't have anybody to help me. And she said that was something that like the poorer ladies did. And I mean, it was supposed to be a big deal for you to be able to have bottles that you could wash and, that you could feed your child with. She said, but watching you do this is just so amazing. I really wish that I had done that. And I think that it was another area that my mom and I had bonded on, just with her watching me. And then the other picture beside it is me in the middle of my preeclampsia with my twins and my little boy when they were much smaller. But yeah, I breastfed all 3 of those little people. And I didn't know if I could do it, but I knew that I really, really wanted to. And it took support from a lot of people around me. And my mom didn't do it for me, but I was able to do it successfully. And I just feel like every woman deserves that opportunity. So Anne kind of alluded to this. This is my acting debut. So it shows you evolution. So I got to participate in an educational program to be able to train people on how to talk to folks about breastfeeding and giving them information. And it was phenomenal. I never really envisioned myself, again, being a movie star of sorts, but this was an elaborate setup. There's a picture of me and my co-star. I get to say co-star. It's awesome. And it was a whole ordeal, like full lights, camera, action. One of the great experiences. I'm so grateful for that opportunity. So now I'll just kind of take a second and kind of get ready to summarize. What are the things that we can do? Again, we're supporting breastfeeding. We know why it matters, but women need support where they breastfeed, which should be everywhere. And that's whether it's by policies at work, by making sure that women have the opportunity to have the space and time that they need to do this. It's not always easy, but it is so worth it. By making sure that we are creating and fostering opportunities that will continue to help them to be able to provide adequate nutrition for their children. Here in the United States, we don't look at it in the same way as they do in some of the developing countries. But in developing countries, whether or not a woman is able to breastfeed can be life and death for their families. And there are some cultures where the grandmothers are actually breastfeeding their grandchildren if the mom is unable to do so in order to provide life-sustaining nutrition to their children. And of course, you can't let a talk go by without mentioning COVID. So I just want to say that with respect to COVID, women with COVID can breastfeed if they wish to, and they should be supportive. Most organizations have the capacity to provide the support that's necessary for them to be able to do that. Close contact, early exclusive breastfeeding helps a baby to thrive, and it still means the same for women who have COVID. So this is just these last little thoughts I'd like to leave with you when we're thinking about everyday advocacy. You know, this is a quote from a lady named Stephanie Rupnicki. I can't say that right. And she said, breastfeeding is natural. She said it should be a biological norm. And I will go a little bit further and say, not only is it natural and normal, for some it is essential. And the only way to really make breastfeeding mainstream is to make it commonplace. And I do believe that it should be encouraged, it should be promoted, it should be supported, but it shouldn't be used as a weapon against mothers. Just because something makes people uncomfortable doesn't make it wrong. I have a personal story about that. Sometimes it takes making people uncomfortable in order for things to be made right. And if you think about the transformation that happens from a seed to a tree or a seed to a plant, it's uncomfortable. It is explosive. It is dramatic. And what I've learned, one of my residents said to me the other day, I said, I'm going to use that for a long time. She said, she said, growth is uncomfortable. And so we shouldn't always feel limited by comfort. Comfort is usually we're not growing if we're too comfortable. So don't underestimate your ability or power to be a catalyst for change. In closing, I will say these are two quotes that I read on Mother's Day in the news that said, moms are shamed for staying home, for going to work, for breastfeeding, for not breastfeeding, for the way they hold their babies, for kissing their kids, for drinking wine, for going out too much, and for being antisocial. American moms need U.S. society to value caregiving. And that's a quote from Caitlin Collins, who's a professor of sociology at WashU in St. Louis. She's like, the U.S. society devalues caregiving because we associate it with femininity, this thing that emanates naturally from mothers. And so it's not a skill. It's not something that requires support because it's just something that moms do. So as the young folks say, I would like to encourage everyone, value caregiving, encourage mothers and parents, and support families. I would say normalize this.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Dr. Owens, for that wonderful presentation. Lovely family, who I hope one day I have the privilege to meet. So it's great to have heard your talk. We don't have time for any questions. However, I would say that I have been monitoring the chat and nobody's actually asked any questions. Everyone has just been saying, wow, 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 how inspirational. Oh my God, thank you, Dr. Owens. We need more OBGYN advocates like you. So we had the neonatologist we all dream of, and now we've had the OB we all dream of. So this is great. And you need to go to the chat, Michelle, after you've spoken, and just see you will be warmed by the many, many wonderful comments. So thank you again. And I'm going to have to let you go reluctantly.
No, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
It's been great to have you. Thank you. And we're going to now go to the next session. There will be a little slide in between as we transition. Don't go away. It's just for a couple of seconds. And Laura is going to come on after that and introduce our next speaker. So thank you very much, Michelle, and for everybody in our first session there.